Hello, my name is Father Timothy Ty, and this is our 185th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross, and I thank you so much for joining us. We look up on our screen and we read, Chronicles reflects the convictions of wealthy Judeans in Babylon in 400 BC that both Jerusalem and diaspora Jews had to recommit together to heroic observance of Torah, temple worship, and David's eternal kingdom to be blessed with prosperity. We go on to our next screen. The teachings in Chronicles had been evolving for 200 years from the time of the exile in 598 or 600 to 400. The first exiles were wealthy and talented and went to Babylon in 598. They were treated well, for people with language and number skill were needed for contracts, treaties, and other documents. Some Judeans left and assimilated, but the faithful began a deep reevaluation of who they were and why they felt a deep personal call from Yahweh to remain faithful to their call and mission. They're in exile, but they feel God's presence very deeply. Chronicles wanted Judeans to remember that all their wisdom and skill came because of the temple, and that's why they're surviving in prosperity. We go on to our next screen and we read, one group in the beginning, right as we go into exile, edited Deuteronomy, and we covered that, in which Moses updates the law for a farm culture just before he dies, as Israel prepares to cross the Jordan into a farm culture in the Promised Land. Secondly, after they finish the second law, the same Deuteronomic writers produce a history of Israel. They edited the Deuteronomic history of Israel from Joshua to Judges, 1 and 2 Samuel, and 1 and 2 Kings, and they finished it in about 540. Meanwhile, some priests re-edited Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, published about the year 500. Then these two groups integrated their work as Torah, the result as we have it today, and the second law history of Israel after Moses. We go on to our next screen and we read, the editing of Torah and the historical books in Babylon between 600 and 500. All right, we see that second group produced the first 4 books, and they added Deuteronomy, and they made it 5 books, the Pentateuch. It was both a summary of the Pentateuch, and it was also an introduction to the historical books, a prologue to the historical books. So we have the first big group of books in the Bible. Now, as beautiful and wonderful as all this is, we go on to our next screen and we see that the Chronicles think they have to add something on, something's missing. So they updated the historical books for the restoration from 500 to 400. Why did they do this? Because none of these books covered what it was like to be in exile and what it was like now in 400 in Jerusalem in the second temple, which paled in comparison to Solomon's temple. So Chronicles writes Ezra and Nehemiah, and then they go to 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. Now in the Bible, 1 and 2 Chronicles is before Ezra and Nehemiah, but it was written afterwards around the year 400. Okay, we go on to our next screen. And what is all this coming together? In 1 Chronicles 28:3, David is told, as we ended the last segment, you shall not build a house for me, for you are a warrior who shed blood. And now we go to 2 Chronicles, begins this section. Solomon never shone at war or shedding blood in Chronicles, which reflected the exiles' new life in Babylon. They were educated people, and they loved David, but they were not like him. They were like Solomon. The exiles were not warriors, for their educated skills won prosperity in a domesticated world. Accordingly, we read in 2 Chronicles 1:10, Solomon prayed, give me wisdom and knowledge, O Lord, and God answered, since you did not ask for possessions or wealth, revenge of enemies or long life, but wisdom and knowledge to rule my people, I grant your request. Now we go on to our next screen and we read Chronicles taught that God, by ordering Solomon to build the temple, blessed Israel with many skills that would bless Judeans, especially in exile, especially the Levites. So we read, 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 3, Solomon asked King Huram, he's out in Tyre on the Mediterranean coast, send me artisans skilled in precious metals, in fabrics, and trained in engraving to work with my artisans and teach them how to do it. Send trained servants to work with my servants to teach them to cut and prepare timber for my house. So God blessed those who lived in Jerusalem and did not farm, with wisdom and skill that blessed Israel in many years in the future. We go on to our next screen and we read, despite living in Jerusalem, Yahweh's abode, with all the blessings that came with it, God had to warn the people of Jerusalem. But if you forsake my commands that I set before you to serve and worship other gods, and it's also for the people in 400, I will pull you out of this land, and I will pull you out of this house, which I consecrated in my name, and cast you out of my sight. And this actually happened in 598. And when they ask why, they will say, because they abandoned their Lord and God. God blessed Israel with skills and prosperity, yet those who abandoned God's covenant would also abandon their marriage covenant. So this is very important. You leave others, and God will leave you. You'll feel it that way. We go on to our next screen. Solomon is a man of discretion and understanding, brought the purity of order. This is very important. He brings order through Torah. All the priests present purified themselves. They were in the right place and doing the right thing. Levites and trumpeters and singers sang as one. They were in harmony. They worked together. Solomon prayed on a daily schedule that when his people sinned and caused disorder, he prays that they repent and restore order. He's a good king. The king and people dedicated God's house. All the priests were at their stations, as were the Levites with their musical instruments. They knew how to bring order and good life to their community. We go on to the next screen. As a man of discipline, discretion, and perfect control of his inclinations, this is what the sages said a good Jew was supposed to be, he could influence even royal women, as Nehemiah the eunuch influenced Artaxerxes' queen, King Artaxerxes of Persia. 811. Solomon built Pharaoh's daughter a place outside the city, saying, no wife of mine will dwell in David's city, the abode of the ark of the Lord, for she's a goyim and she doesn't belong here. He had discretion. All this leads up to the visit of the Queen of Sheba, and this ends the segment on Solomon. Having heard of Solomon's fame, the Queen of Sheba came to test him, bringing with her many spices, gold, and precious stones. We go on to our next screen. As the queen witnessed Solomon's wisdom, his palace, and his food, the kosher food, the order of his ministers and servants, and the holocaust offered to Yahweh, it took her breath away. She said to him, you have surpassed all the stories that I heard about you. So she gave him 120 gold talents, many spices of great value, and precious stones. What's the teaching we're getting to? Royalty values Torah wisdom, and they will reward you. So the Jews were told, if you can help these people with your riches, you will be rewarded. Solomon gave the queen all she asked for, and then returned to her own country. So we see the building of the temple and the wisdom of Jerusalem all came together. We go on to our next screen. Exiled superachievers could be like Joseph, Solomon, and Nehemiah, the eunuch, with perfect control of their inclinations. If they heroically observed the life-cultivating order of God's covenant, as taught by Torah, and they were completely faithful to their marriage covenants. We go on to our next screen and we read, Chronicles reflects the convictions of wealthy Judeans in Babylon, 400 miles from Jerusalem, in 400 BC, that both Jerusalem and diaspora Jews, both groups, had to recommit to heroic observance of Torah, temple worship, and David's eternal kingdom to be blessed with prosperity. Thank you so much for joining us for this very difficult segment of 185. I hope you can reflect on it and get a lot out of it.